The wind carried the scent of dust and desperation that morning. The town of Dry Creek, a lonely patch of civilization carved into the Badlands, had never been known for mercy. Its people lived by luck, prayer, and the cruelty of necessity. When the drought came, followed by hunger and debt, they invented something uglier than either, a lottery. But this wasn't the kind that gave gold or land. It gave a woman. They called it the bride lottery. Each man who could pay a silver dollar was given a ticket. The prize, a woman from the poor quarter, one of those whose husbands had died or whose families had fallen too far behind on taxes. The men laughed as they dropped their coins into the wooden box, not caring that the women stood there trembling like lambs in a pen. Evelyn Grace stood among them, her chin lifted even as her stomach twisted with shame. Once she had been a schoolteacher, her voice soft but steady, her hands ink-stained from chalk and letters. Then her husband died of fever, and debt swallowed her house whole. With no kin, no coin, and no law to protect her, she was placed in the lineup like a commodity. Her name had been written on a slip of paper, folded and tossed into the box. It was all too public, too cruel. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs refused her. The mayor stood on the platform, sweat glistening under his hat. "Now, folks," he declared, holding up the carved bowl that held their fates, "the rules are clear. Each man who bought a ticket gets one chance to win himself a fine woman. And remember, no refunds." The laughter that followed was jagged and sharp. Evelyn's eyes darted toward the edge of the crowd, toward a figure who didn't belong. He stood taller than most, his long black hair tied loosely behind him, his chest bare beneath a fringed leather vest. An Apache. The crowd had parted when he walked in, the kind of silence that came from both hatred and fear. "Kyle," someone whispered. "That's the savage from the ridge." Evelyn had heard the name. The Apache who lived alone in the Red Canyons, far from tribe and town alike. Rumor said he'd fought in the border wars, that he'd lost his family to soldiers and something in him had broken. So when he stepped forward, placing a dull silver coin on the table, the whole town went still. The mayor hesitated. "You can't," he started, but Cale's voice cut through the heat like a blade. "You said any man who pays." The mayor swallowed, sweat dripping from his chin. No one dared challenge the warrior's stare. Cale's dark eyes looked as if they carried every desert storm that had ever raged. Reluctantly, the mayor dropped a folded ticket into the bowl and began to stir. "Then let fate decide," he muttered. The drumbeat of silence filled the air as he reached in, pulled a slip free, and unfolded it slowly. His voice cracked when he read the name. Evelyn Grace. A murmur swept through the crowd. Evelyn froze. She looked from the mayor to Cale, disbelief widening her eyes. The Apache didn't move at first. Then with calm that felt almost cruel, he walked forward, each step deliberate, silent, certain. The mayor's voice faltered. "By law of lottery, she belongs to him." The crowd erupted, half jeers, half gasps. A woman cried out, "He can't take her." Another shouted, "It's a trick." But Cale didn't look at them. He stopped in front of Evelyn, his shadow falling over her, and spoke in a low voice meant only for her. "I entered to show them what it means to play with lives. But now your name is mine." Evelyn's voice trembled. "What will you do with me?" He looked at her for a long, unreadable moment, eyes neither cruel nor kind, only tired. Then he said softly, "What I must." As the sun bled across the horizon and the crowd parted in stunned silence, the lonely Apache took his unwilling bride and walked away from the town, toward the wild canyons where fate waited in red dust and shadows. The sun hung low, spilling molten gold across the canyon ridges as Cale led his horse down the rocky trail. Evelyn rode behind him, her wrists bound loosely with rawhide, not from cruelty but to keep her from falling. Her skirts were torn, her bonnet gone, and every jolt of the horse sent another shiver of dust up her arms. She hadn't spoken since they left Dry Creek. Fear clung to her throat like grit. Every sound, the cry of a hawk, the groan of the saddle, made her heart kick harder. Cale walked ahead in silence, his back straight, his steps steady. He didn't look at her, didn't try to speak. His world seemed to exist apart from hers, one made of stone, wind, and endless distance. When the canyon narrowed, he stopped at a stream and finally turned. "Drink," he said simply. She hesitated, glaring at him as if waiting for mockery. But his face was unreadable, neither harsh nor gentle, only quiet. She knelt by the water, cupped her hands, and drank. The coolness burned down her throat, sharp and real. Cale crouched beside her, refilling his flask. "You think I wanted this?" he said without looking up. Evelyn froze. "Didn't you?" she asked bitterly. "You entered the lottery. You paid the coin." He gave a low, humorless sound, something between a laugh and a sigh. "I paid to shame them," he said. "Men who sell their women deserve to see what it means when the world turns their game against them." She turned to face him fully for the first time. "Then why didn't you refuse when they called my name?" His eyes lifted, dark, fathomless, reflecting the dying light. "Because the same men who laughed would have dragged you to another winner. Or worse. You were safer walking with me than left to them." Her breath caught. The words made sense, but her heart refused to believe them. "Safe?" she whispered. "With a man who could—" He interrupted quietly, his tone grave but calm. "I could," he admitted, "but I won't." The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than any threat. She wanted to hate him, to see him as a villain, a savage, something easy to despise. But there was no malice in his eyes. Only a hollow sadness. They rode until night fell. Coyotes howled in the distance and the stars came alive in the black velvet sky. When Cale stopped at a small plateau, he began setting up camp. Efficient, silent, practiced. Evelyn sat stiffly, watching as he built a small fire and laid out a blanket. He didn't tie her again. Instead, he untied the rawhide at her wrists and placed a piece of dried meat and bread near her. "Eat, rest," he said. She hesitated. "You mean to keep me prisoner?" He looked up from the fire. "Prisoner?" he repeated softly. "No, a prisoner has walls. I have none to give you." That strange answer left her speechless. Later, when the fire had burned low, she watched him from where she sat. He was sharpening a blade, his movements slow, deliberate. In the firelight, the scars on his shoulders caught her eye. Long, faded lines of battle and pain. Without looking up, Cale spoke again, voice low and steady. "You fear me. You should. I have done things no man should be proud of. But I have never hurt a woman, not even when they called me beast. Then why live alone?" she asked before she could stop herself. He paused. "Because a man with too much blood on his hands should not walk among the living." His words hung in the still air, heavy as stone. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. She had thought him proud, savage, but what she saw now was grief, old and unhealed. He lay down a few feet away, facing the dying fire. "Sleep," he murmured. "Tomorrow we reach my land. There you'll decide what comes next." She turned away, but sleep did not come easily. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried to the moon. Evelyn stared at the embers and thought of the strange man beside her, the one who had won her in a lottery but spoke like a ghost who wanted nothing from the world, and, for the first time since her name was drawn, she began to wonder if fate had chosen her, not as punishment, but as part of a story neither of them had meant to begin. Dawn broke over the red cliffs like a wound of light. The canyon air was cold, biting at Evelyn's cheeks as she swung her leg over the horse. Cale was already mounted, his long shadow stretching across the rocky path. He didn't speak, didn't look at her, he never did. Yet somehow she felt his awareness like a tether, as if he could feel every hesitant heartbeat of hers. The horses moved in silence at first, hooves clicking against stone, the only sound the whine of the morning wind. Evelyn's stomach churned with fear, anger, and something more complicated, the curiosity. Every time she glanced at Cale, he seemed untouchable, carved from the very cliffs around them. Muscles corded beneath his tanned skin, scars dark in the sunlight, and his eyes, always dark, seemed to see beyond the world. Not her exactly, but the life she had left behind, the pain, the shame, the hopelessness. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice small, nearly lost in the canyon's vastness. Cale's horse didn't slow. "Somewhere safe," he replied simply, his voice rough like gravel. "Where the town cannot follow, where no one can claim you again." "Safe," she repeated bitterly. "Safe from them, or from you?" Cale's jaw tightened. "From both," he said. Then, as if sensing her skepticism, he added quietly, "I did not enter that lottery to claim a bride. I entered it to shame the town, but now you are mine by their law, not mine by desire. That is all you need to know." Evelyn's hands tightened on the reins. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted, her voice trembling. You could turn at any moment, kill me. Leave me to die in the canyon. Cale's eyes flicked to her, and for a fraction of a second something softened in his gaze. I am not your enemy, he said. Not unless you make me so. Her chest tightened. The words were simple, but they carried a weight heavier than any threat. She wanted to believe him, wanted to hope. But the fear clawed at her mind, reminding her of every betrayal she had endured. Still, there was no cruelty in his voice, no mockery. Only the bare, quiet truth. Hours passed as the canyon swallowed them. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows that shifted and disappeared with the rocks. Evelyn's legs ached from sitting so long. She tried to speak again, asking questions about the land, about him, about why he lived so far from his people. Cale's answers were brief, almost evasive, yet not rude. He shared enough to keep her from panic, but never enough to let her close. By midday, they reached a narrow ridge. Below stretched a valley of red rock and scrub, dotted with twisted junipers and the glitter of a hidden stream. Cale stopped, letting the horses graze. He dismounted, moving with quiet grace to help Evelyn down. You'll need to walk this part, he said, pointing toward a hidden path that wound down the cliffside. It's safer for the horses. She nodded, swallowing fear and pride alike. Cale walked beside her, not touching, not guiding, simply existing in the space next to her. And yet, each step she took, she felt the tether of his presence. There was an unspoken protection there, a promise that he would not abandon her, though she could not yet call it trust. As they descended, the canyon seemed to close around them. The wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Evelyn's heart pounded, not just from exertion, but from the strange, unsettling closeness of Cale. He was silent, always silent, yet in that silence she felt the weight of his attention, the depth of his solitude. By the time they reached the hidden valley, Evelyn realized something terrifying and exhilarating. She had survived the first day beside him. And she hadn't been harmed. Cale paused, looking over the valley below. We will rest here, he said, finally meeting her eyes. There is water and shelter nearby. We are not yet safe from the world, but for tonight we are safe from them. Evelyn nodded, relief and exhaustion washing over her. Yet as she followed him toward a cluster of rocks where he had prepared a small fire, she couldn't shake the awareness that the man beside her, the lonely Apache who had won her in a lottery, was a man of storms, as wild and untamed as the canyon itself. And in that wildness she felt a flicker of hope and fear. The valley was small and secret, hidden between jagged red cliffs that glowed gold in the afternoon sun. Cale led Evelyn toward a cluster of rocks that framed a narrow entrance. Behind it, partially concealed by shadows and a wall of boulders, was a small cabin. Rough-hewn logs, sturdy and unwelcoming to outsiders. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney, carrying the scent of burning pine. This is where we'll rest, Cale said, his voice low. He didn't ask her opinion. In his world, decisions were made to protect, not to negotiate. Evelyn's eyes scanned the cabin's exterior. It was simple, Spartan, but strong. There were no doors that could lock her in. No chains beyond the thin leather straps he had used to secure her hands on the ride. She felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. The outside world, full of cruel eyes and judgment, could not touch her here. Yet inside she was completely in his hands. Cale helped her down from her horse. His touch was firm but careful, guiding her without words. For the first time she noticed how tall he was, how broad-shouldered, and how every movement seemed deliberate, controlled, as if he were always balancing on the edge of danger. You may rest inside, he said, indicating the cabin. I'll gather water and food. Tonight the canyon is ours alone. Evelyn hesitated. She wanted to speak, to protest, to assert herself. But the sight of him moving toward the stream, strong and silent, made her realize the futility. She entered the cabin, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor. Inside it was small, dim but warm. A fire pit had been carved into the stone floor, and a single blanket lay neatly folded on the corner platform that served as a bed. She sank to the floor, hugging her knees. The day's ride had left her exhausted and weary. Her mind replayed the events of the morning, the lottery, the jeering townspeople, the strange man who had won her and yet, so far, had done nothing but keep her safe. Outside, Cale worked silently, carrying water from the stream, arranging small bundles of dried meat and berries. Evelyn watched through the doorway's shadow, noting the way his muscles flexed with each movement, the way his hands handled tools and fire with care. She didn't understand him. She didn't even want to. But there was a gravity in his presence that pulled at her attention, whether she liked it or not. When he returned, he knelt by the fire and set the food near her. "Eat," he said, simple, without emotion. His eyes met hers for a fraction of a second. Dark, unreadable, but not cruel. I don't know if I can," she admitted. Fear still tightened her throat. "You must," he replied, almost as if it were not a suggestion, but a law of survival. She hesitated, then took a small piece of dried meat, tasting it cautiously. It was bitter but sustaining. Cale watched her silently, as if judging how much trust she might eventually place in him. Night fell quickly in the canyon. Stars spilled across the sky like scattered embers, and the wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the distant call of a coyote. Cale lay a blanket near the fire and gestured for her to sit beside it. She did, still unsure of the boundaries between fear and curiosity. For the first time, she saw him relax slightly. His eyes softened as he stared into the flames. She noticed the scars along his forearms, the faint lines etched across his chest. They were marks of battles fought and endured, silent reminders of the life he had carried alone. "You don't have to talk," she said softly, testing the silence. He didn't answer immediately. Then, almost to himself, he muttered, "I have carried too much noise in my head to burden it with words now. You will speak when you choose." Evelyn felt an unexpected twinge of relief. He did not demand, he did not coerce. He only existed in the same space as her, a quiet, steady presence that felt strange and unnerving. As the firelight flickered and shadows danced across the cabin walls, Evelyn realized that she would have to sleep here, alone with the man who had taken her by chance yet seemed not a captor, and somewhere deep in her chest a small, wary hope began to stir. The hope that this lonely Apache, who had entered a cruel game with empty hands, might be the one to guide her through the wild, unforgiving canyon, and perhaps even through the wildness of her own heart. The canyon morning arrived with a sharp chill, the sun barely stretching its fingers across the rocky walls. Evelyn stirred on the edge of the blanket, still wary of the stranger beside her, the man who had claimed her in a lottery yet had harmed her in no way. Kyle was already awake, moving silently about the cabin. His presence felt like a living shadow, steady and inescapable, and she couldn't help but notice every precise motion. Stacking firewood, tending a small cooking pot, sharpening the blade that had been his companion for years. The tension between them was unspoken but tangible. Evelyn's pride bristled at the memory of her capture and the humiliation that had followed. Cale's pride, deep and silent, radiated through his careful movements. Neither spoke of it, yet each sensed the invisible line drawn between fear and respect, between caution and curiosity. "Eat," Cale said abruptly, offering her a small piece of dried meat and a slice of bread. His voice carried no warmth, no condescension, merely the command of necessity. Evelyn glanced at him, bristling. "I don't need your charity." He raised an eyebrow, unoffended. "You need food," he replied simply. "You do not yet know the canyon as I do." The words were blunt, almost harsh, but not untrue. Hunger had been gnawing at her since leaving Dry Creek, and she knew it. Reluctantly, she ate, chewing slowly, tasting dust and survival in every bite. Cale watched, eyes never leaving her, but there was no rush, no demand. Only quiet vigilance. After their meal, Cale gestured toward the cliffs above. "You will climb. You will carry water. You will help me tend the camp." "No complaints," Evelyn's eyes widened. "I'm not your servant," she snapped. "I am not your captor," he countered, his voice calm, almost like a whisper of wind. "You are here. You eat, you survive. I only ask that you learn." Pride flared in her chest. She wanted to fight him, to defy him, to prove she was more than a helpless bride, more than a piece of property to be moved through the world. And so she did. The climb was grueling. Loose stones slid under her boots, and her arms ached as she hauled the heavy pail of water from the hidden spring below. Kyle moved beside her effortlessly, as if the canyon itself had made him for this life. Yet he did not help, not because he lacked care, but because he respected the balance of teaching through endurance. By midday, Evelyn's muscles burned, her breath came in ragged gasps, and her hands bore the marks of rope and stone. She wanted to collapse, to scream, to demand release. But Cale's eyes, steady, dark, and unyielding, held her in place. They were not cruel, not mocking, but they were immovable, like the cliffs themselves, you see? He said finally, voice low. The canyon teaches in ways no town ever could. You endure or you fail. Your choice. Her chest heaved, a mixture of exhaustion and something she couldn't name. Anger, yes, but also admiration. The man beside her was relentless but fair, ruthless but honest. He demanded respect, yet offered none in return, except through the recognition of her own strength. As the sun sank low, Cale finally allowed them a rest. Evelyn slumped against a rock, sweat and dust coating her skin, every ache a reminder of the day's battle. Kyle handed her a water skin, and for a moment their fingers brushed. She recoiled slightly, but he did not withdraw. You are stronger than you believe, he said quietly, almost to himself. Do not mistake pride for weakness. The two are not the same. Evelyn stared at him, chest heaving, heart pounding. For the first time she felt a flicker of connection, a bridge across fear built on shared struggle rather than words. She still didn't trust him fully, and perhaps never would. But she began to see him differently. Not only as the man who had claimed her, but as a companion of sorts. A guide through pain and perhaps eventually, through something more. As dusk settled over the canyon, the firelight casting long shadows on the rocks, Evelyn realized that surviving Cale's world required not just strength of body, but strength of spirit. And in that realization, the first fragile threads of respect, and maybe even trust, began to weave between them. The battle of pride and pain was not over. Not by far, but for the first time, it felt as if they were fighting it together. The wind had been growing all afternoon, rattling the canyon walls and carrying dust like a warning. Cale had been tending the fire, checking the perimeter of their small camp while Evelyn sat on the edge of the blanket, arms wrapped around her knees. She had grown more accustomed to the rhythm of his presence, the silent authority, the careful watch, but the storm outside seemed to mirror the storm inside her own chest. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the cliffs. Evelyn flinched. Cale's eyes, dark and steady, swept toward the sky. We'll need to shelter, he said, his voice calm, measured. Before she could protest, he moved with swift efficiency, gathering firewood, dragging their supplies into the small cabin. The wind screamed through the canyon, whipping against the rocks, shaking dust and small stones into the shelter. Rain began to fall, fat drops splattering against the roof, punctuating the roar of the storm. Evelyn watched him work, her pulse quickening with a mix of fear and awe. There was something almost hypnotic in the way he moved, precise, deliberate, controlled. Every action was purposeful, as if he was attuned to the storm in a way she could not yet understand. The first strike of lightning lit up the cabin, briefly illuminating the dark plains of his face. Kyle's eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. He did not smile, did not speak, yet the intensity of his gaze sent a shiver down her spine. Are you afraid? He asked finally, breaking the silence with a voice low and quiet, almost intimate. Evelyn hesitated. Of the storm, or you, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Cale's lips curved in the faintest trace of a smile, almost imperceptible. Both, he said, as if admitting it were something rare even for him. Then he added, you will not be harmed here. Not by the storm, not by me, but I need you to trust that, even if only a little. Her heart hammered in her chest. Trust was a foreign concept, especially with a man who had won her in a cruel game, who had claimed her without her consent. And yet there was no threat in his words, no coercion, only honesty, raw and stark, like the lightning cutting through the canyon sky. The storm intensified, rattling the cabin and shoving shadows into the corners. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she reached for the blanket. Cale noticed and moved closer, kneeling beside her. His presence was commanding yet protective, a paradox that made her pulse quicken. I've carried storms before, he said quietly, almost as if speaking to the wind. But you are unlike any storm I've faced, and I would not let you break. Evelyn's breath caught. His words were soft, but they carried weight. A weight that pulled at her defenses, unraveling the armor she had worn for years. She looked into his eyes, searching for a trace of mockery, a flicker of cruelty, but found none, only raw honesty, strength, and a strange vulnerability. The rain lashed against the cabin walls, and a sudden gust slammed the door open. Cale moved instinctively, closing it, shielding her with his body. She could feel the heat of him, the solidness of his form, And for the first time, fear was mingled with something else. Safety. "You're shaking," he observed quietly, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "Stop me if I go too deep," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the storm. "But I want you to know you are not alone." Evelyn's eyes widened. She didn't know whether to recoil or lean closer. Her body, so used to fear, hesitated on the edge of surrender. But the sincerity in his tone, the steady weight of his presence, cut through her panic. She did not stop him. They sat together, two shadows in the flickering firelight, listening to the storm rage outside. And in that shared silence, Evelyn realized something she hadn't before. The man who had claimed her in a cruel lottery might also be the man who could protect her from the storms of the world, and perhaps even the storms inside her own heart. For the first time since her name had been drawn, Evelyn did not feel entirely alone. The storm had passed, leaving the canyon washed in silver moonlight. The air smelled of wet pine and warm earth, and the hush of the valley was broken only by the crackle of the dying fire in the cabin's hearth. Evelyn sat cross-legged on the blanket, her hands clasped loosely around her knees, watching Cale move with silent efficiency. He was tending the fire, feeding embers into the hearth, his long black hair falling into his face as he worked. For hours they had been silent, each wrapped in thoughts too heavy to speak. The storm had opened a door, if only slightly, a shared vulnerability neither had expected. Evelyn's heart still raced from the night's events, the closeness, the unspoken words hanging like sparks between them. Kyle finally sat across from her, legs crossed, eyes reflecting the firelight. There was a softness to his gaze now, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. "You've been quiet," he observed. "I've been listening," Evelyn replied softly. "To the canyon, to the fire, to you." Her voice faltered at the last word, caught between fear and curiosity. Kyle's lips curved faintly. "I do not speak often. Words are heavy, actions easier to understand." Evelyn nodded. She wanted to speak, to tell him everything. The loneliness she had carried since her husband died, the shame of being sold like an object in a cruel lottery, the helplessness that had made her bitter. Yet words felt inadequate, fragile, unable to convey the depths of her pain. Instead, she spoke slowly, cautiously. "I lost everything. Before I even knew what it meant to be safe." Cale's eyes darkened. "And yet you are here, alive, breathing against every expectation." "Expectation?" she asked, curiosity tinged with bitterness. "The expectation that the world would break you," he said quietly. "But you are not so easily broken. I see it in the way you move, the way you fight, the way you have endured, even today." Evelyn felt heat rise to her cheeks, but not from shame. His words were unexpected, honest, and heavy with understanding. Few had ever recognized her strength. Most had only noticed her vulnerability. She shifted closer to the fire, closer to him, though still unsure of the space between them. "I thought I would hate you," she whispered. "I thought you were, I don't know, a threat." Cale's eyes softened further. "I entered that lottery to mock their cruelty," he said. "I never sought you as a prize. I only sought to show them the cost of their actions, and yet, now that you are here, I find that I care, not as they do, not as a possession, but as someone who cannot turn away from another human in need." Evelyn's throat tightened. She had never heard anyone speak like that. Never with such honesty, such restraint, and yet such intensity. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her knees. "You are unlike anyone I have met," she said quietly. "And yet, I feel seen." Cale nodded. "You are. And in this place, in this moment. I do not wish to harm you. I only wish to protect you, if you allow it." Her pulse raced, and for the first time since the lottery, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. She didn't yet trust him fully, and that would take time and trials and proof. But she felt the fragile beginnings of a bond, a connection forged in fire, storm, and shared vulnerability. The firelight danced across his face, highlighting the scars that spoke of battles fought and survived. She reached out almost instinctively and laid a hand near his, though not touching. Kyle noticed the motion and did not move away. "You have fought storms before," she said softly. "And yet, you allow me to see them now." Cale's eyes held hers, steady and unwavering. "Because you are not a storm to be fought," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "You are someone I must understand, and perhaps if fate allows, someone I can protect." Evelyn's heart raced. She had expected cruelty, domination, or indifference. Instead, she found honesty, patience, and a strange, compelling intimacy that neither had spoken aloud. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to exhale fully, to feel the warmth of the fire, the quiet strength of the man beside her, and the tentative possibility that, even in a world of cruelty and chance, two lost souls could find connection. They sat like that for hours, listening to the canyon breathe around them, two shadows by firelight, neither touching, yet both changed in ways words could scarcely capture. The calm of the canyon was deceptive. Even as dawn stretched its pale fingers across the cliffs, Evelyn could feel it, a tension in the air, sharp and unforgiving. Cale had risen early, checking the perimeter and listening to the distant winds. He didn't speak of it, but she could see the flicker of caution in his eyes. They had grown accustomed to the rhythm of survival, gathering water, tending fire, foraging for small berries and herbs. Evelyn's muscles ached less now, her movements more confident. Yet the outside world, Dry Creek, the men who had jeered and humiliated her, had not forgotten. It began with the first hoofbeats. Faint at first, almost lost in the canyon wind, but unmistakable. Horses, multiple, carrying men armed with rifles and malice. Evelyn stiffened, heart hammering. Cale's hand went to the knife at his belt, but his other hand rested lightly on her shoulder, steadying her. "They're coming for you," he said quietly. "I can fight," she said immediately, though her voice trembled. Fear and determination warred within her. She had survived the lottery, the ride, the canyon. She could survive this too. Cale's eyes darkened. "No, not alone. Not if they mean to kill." The sound of hooves grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls. Evelyn grabbed a rifle Cale had prepared earlier, fumbling with it but refusing to let go. She was not going to be passive, not anymore. The first riders crested the ridge, guns glinting in the morning light. The men from Dry Creek had come, their pride bruised, their anger fueled by the humiliation of losing her to the Apache. They shouted, demanding she be returned, some calling for Cale's death. Kyle stepped forward, tall and imposing, every muscle coiled. "Leave now," he warned. "You will not take her." The men laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. One stepped forward, rifle raised, assuming they could overpower him. Evelyn's hands tightened on her weapon, eyes narrowing. For the first time, she felt not fear, but resolve. A shot rang out. Kyle had fired, the bullet sending a horse rearing and a man sprawling. Chaos erupted. Evelyn ducked behind a boulder, heart pounding, and fired once instinctively. The shot struck true, and a man yelped, dropping his weapon. She felt a strange surge of power and fear, realizing she was capable of defending herself, capable of standing beside the man she had once feared. Cale moved with lethal precision, blocking, striking, and guiding her without words. His hands brushed hers as they shifted positions, and though brief, the contact sent a jolt through her. She no longer felt helpless. She was part of this fight, part of the rhythm of survival, part of Cale's world. The fight was brutal but brief. The men were uncoordinated, enraged by fear and pride. Cale's skill, combined with Evelyn's newfound courage, was overwhelming. By the time the dust settled, the attackers were fleeing, shame and defeat written across their faces. Evelyn's breath came in ragged gasps. She dropped the rifle, trembling, and Cale stepped beside her, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "You fought well," he said quietly, eyes scanning the valley for any sign of pursuit. I didn't want to," she began, but Cale silenced her with a look. "No," he said softly. "You wanted to survive. That is enough." For the first time, Evelyn felt a surge of respect, not just for Cale, but for herself. She had faced fear, danger, and the cruelty of the world, and she had stood her ground. Cale's gaze lingered on her, steady, approving, almost gentle. "You are stronger than I first believed," he said, "and braver. Remember that?" Evelyn nodded, letting the words sink in. She had survived Dry Creek, the lottery, the canyon, and now the town's revenge. She felt a flicker of something dangerous. Hope, courage, perhaps even a bond forming with the man beside her. As the canyon fell silent again, Evelyn realized they were not just survivors. Together they were a force, and the town that had sought to shame her would never forget the day the lonely Apache and the bride he won in a lottery stood their ground. The sun hung low, painting the canyon walls in streaks of red and gold as silence settled after the chaos. Evelyn knelt beside one of the men who had fallen, not from cruelty but from the reality of survival. Her hands shook slightly, dirt and blood smearing her sleeves, and her breath came in ragged gasps. She had never fired a rifle with such intent, never stood in the line of danger beside another person, and yet there she was, alive, unbroken, and surprisingly aware of the man beside her. Kyle was crouched opposite her, dark eyes scanning the fleeing attackers, muscles taut and ready. When the last echo of hooves faded into the canyon, he finally lowered his weapon. His expression softened as he turned toward her, the tension in his body easing slightly. "You did well," he said, voice low but firm. I didn't know I could," Evelyn admitted, her chest heaving. She looked at him, startled by the intensity in his gaze. "I was scared, but I had to fight." Kyle studied her for a moment, and then something almost imperceptible softened in his posture. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of dirt-streaked hair from her face. "Fear is a companion, not a weakness," he said. "You embraced it and stood your ground. That is strength." Her pulse quickened. There was something in the way he looked at her, a mixture of admiration, relief, and something else she could not name. Her own heart betrayed her with a strange flutter, a dangerous curiosity that she tried to suppress. "You saved me," he said quietly, voice almost lost to the canyon wind. "Do you know that?" I didn't," she said softly, glancing down. "I just didn't want to fail. Not today. Not here." Kyle reached out, not forceful but deliberate, and guided her to sit beside him. The sun's dying light reflected off his skin, highlighting the scars that told the story of his battles, both physical and emotional. Evelyn felt a heat rising in her cheeks as she realized how close she was to him, so close that she could feel the faint warmth radiating from his body. "The canyon does not forgive weakness," he murmured. "Nor does life, but you have shown courage beyond what most ever summon." Her breath caught. She had faced the lottery, Dry Creek, the harsh canyon, and now armed men. Yet standing here beside Cale, hearing his words, she felt something even more unfamiliar. Pride. Not just survival, but a deeper awareness of her own strength. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and pine, and Cale's gaze softened further. He placed a hand lightly on hers, not touching forcefully, but enough to ground her, steady her racing pulse. "You fought by my side," he said, voice low and deliberate, "and I could not imagine facing this world without you." Evelyn looked up, meeting his eyes. The intensity, the honesty, the vulnerability in them, and it was almost too much to bear. "Cale," she whispered, the sound trembling in the canyon air. He didn't move closer, yet the space between them felt charged, almost sacred. "I am not used to this," he admitted. "To care, to feel. But I cannot deny it. You are not just someone I protect. You are someone I want to keep safe. Always." Her hand brushed his, hesitant, testing the fragile boundary. The touch sent a thrill through her. Not fear, not shame, but something dangerous and sweet. "And she began, voice breaking softly. "I feel the same, even though I shouldn't." Cale's lips curved faintly, almost imperceptibly, but his eyes never left hers. "No rules in the canyon," he said softly. "Only what we choose, together." The sky shifted from gold to deep indigo, the first stars appearing in the clear desert air. Evelyn felt the canyon around them, the wind, the rocks, the vast emptiness, and realized she was no longer alone. Not with Cale, not in this wild, untamed place. As the sun sank behind the cliffs, casting shadows across the valley, Evelyn understood that this day, marked by blood and dust, had forged something new between them, a bond stronger than fear, tempered by survival and delicate enough to bloom into love. Cale reached out, and this time their hands met fully, fingers entwining naturally. The touch was electric, grounding, and affirming. For the first time since the lottery, Evelyn felt whole, not just rescued, not just alive, but seen, protected, and perhaps even loved. The canyon wind whispered through the rocks, carrying their silent acknowledgement of each other, and in that moment, the lonely Apache and the bride he had won in a lottery knew one truth. Together, they could face anything the world dared throw at them. The first light of dawn stretched across the canyon, spilling over red cliffs and bathing the valley in a gentle golden glow. The night storm had passed entirely, leaving the air crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt a quiet stillness settle inside her, a calm born not of escape, but of survival and understanding. Kel was already awake, standing at the edge of the plateau surveying the valley. His posture was relaxed but alert, every movement deliberate, every glance sharp. Evelyn watched him, noting the subtle rise and fall of his chest in the morning light, the way the wind caught his hair, and the quiet intensity that had both terrified and captivated her from the start. "You've been watching me again?" Kyle said without turning, voice low and teasing in a rare gesture of warmth. Evelyn paused, smiling despite herself. "I just wanted to see if you were real." Kyle's lips curved faintly. "I am," he said, still gazing over the canyon. "As real as the canyon itself, and you are stronger than I could have imagined." Evelyn felt a surge of pride, tempered by the humility of what they had endured together. She rose to her feet, brushing dust from her skirts, and stepped beside him. The silence between them was comfortable, charged not with fear but with an unspoken understanding, a recognition of what they had survived and what they had discovered in each other. "You know," she said softly, "when they drew my name, I thought my life was over. I thought I would be trapped in shame forever, but—" Her voice faltered as she looked at him, the man who had been both captor and savior, companion and protector. "But you showed me I could live, I could fight, I could be more than I thought I could." Cale finally turned, his dark eyes meeting hers fully. There was a gentleness there she had never seen before, a depth of feeling that frightened and thrilled her at once. "You always had that strength," he said quietly. "I only reminded you of it, and you reminded me that I am not alone either, that even a man like me can be part of something beyond survival." Evelyn felt her heart catch. She had come to the canyon fearful, ashamed, and lost, but now, standing beside Cale in the first light of day, she realized she had been reborn, not as the woman won in a cruel lottery, but as someone who had claimed her own place in the world, who had fought, endured, and chosen, alongside the man who had once seemed untouchable, to step into a new life. Cale reached out, taking her hand gently, his thumb brushing over hers. "You have a name now," he said, voice low and deliberate. "Not a name drawn from shame or chance, but a name you choose, one that belongs to you." Evelyn's eyes shimmered with tears, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and something deeper, hope. "A new name," she whispered, feeling the weight of it, the freedom of it. "Yes," Cale replied, his gaze unwavering, "and we face the world together, not as captor and prize, not as stranger and survivor, but as partners, as equals, as family." The canyon seemed to echo his words, the wind carrying them across the cliffs, through the hidden valley, and into the wide-open sky. Evelyn squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged in fire, storm, and survival. Together they descended into the valley, their steps light, unburdened by the past. The horses followed, and the cabin, once a refuge from fear, now stood as a witness to their transformation. Evelyn breathed deeply, tasting freedom, strength, and possibility. Cale glanced at her, the hint of a smile softening his fierce features. "Are you ready?" he asked. "For what?" she replied, though she knew the answer. "For life," he said simply. "For everything we choose to face. Together." Evelyn nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. The past, the lottery, the town's cruelty, the fear, had shaped her, but it did not define her. With Kyle by her side, she would walk forward, hand in hand with the man who had taught her that courage, trust, and even love could bloom in the most unexpected places. The sun rose fully over the canyon, golden light spilling over the rocks, the firelight of the previous night fading into memory. Evelyn felt the wind on her face, the solid warmth of Cale's hand in hers, and she knew, for the first time, that she had a home. Not just a place, but a person, a life, and a name of her own. And in that dawn, the lonely Apache and the bride he had won in a lottery finally found what they had been searching for all along: belonging, trust, and the quiet, unstoppable flame of love.